Okay, so after this video, for the next several videos, you're not going to hear me say shit. Nope. What's happening here is we're going to be playing a 3-hour long interview with Mr. Nicholas Schreck, and it will be chopped up into 40-ounce increments. 8.1. It ain't no game, bitch, by the way. But yeah. Quick clarification. This interview is from 2017, right before Manson died. So they will still be talking about him in present tense, if you will. All right, that's enough. Let's get to it. 211, full flavor variant.
And filmmaker Nicholas Schreck is the pioneer that founded the musical ensemble Radio Werewolf. Schreck produced the first album of actor Sir Christopher Lee, who many of you may know from his appearances in the Hammer horror films. He's the author of The Manson File, Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman, and he's the director of the 1989 documentary Charles Manson, Superstar. The documentary featured an interview with Charles Manson, which, Schreck had gained Manson's confidence as much as anyone can after years of correspondence, so it's a very good documentary to watch. Schreck may know the truth behind the Manson story and the Manson psyche more than anyone. Now, he doesn't do many interviews at all. Most mainstream journalists believe the Vincent Bugliosi helter-skelter myth, a myth which with many cannot be fought. So, however, he did agree to be on with us tonight because he knows that you, our most humble and loyal audience, are open-minded seekers of historical truths. Now, that's our mission, and that's what we will continue to do tonight. He's joining us live from Berlin, Germany, to tell us how and why Charles Manson did not order the Tate LaBianca murders of 1969. He will also tell us what happened, but more importantly, he'll tell us why it happened. Nicholas Schreck, welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. How are you this evening?
I'm fine and happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Nicholas, it's hard to believe it's been 48 years since the murders first hit the headlines and almost instantly became an American myth in so many ways. How did you first get interested in this story?
Well, that in itself is it goes back 48 years. I'll try to say it in the most condensed way possible. In 1969, when the murders occurred, I was in Europe, actually, and I was in Paris right before they happened, and I saw the film that is called in America The Fearless Vampire Killers. And it's known in Europe as The Dance of the Vampires. I saw this at a theater in Paris, and as your listeners may or may not know, the film starred Sharon Tate, who was murdered that very year. And Roman Polanski directed it, and that was actually, as it turned out, a film that created part of the genesis of what led to the murders. Polanski meeting Sharon Tate and various people in the drug underworld that Polanski knew, that then moved with him to Los Angeles, actually sort of set the bloody ball rolling that led to the murder. So I saw that film and was strangely fascinated by it. I've discussed this before, so I won't go into great detail about it. But the interesting thing about it, the film captivated me for some reason. I was a child then, and one of the interesting things about it, another actor in the film, a German-English actor named Ferdinand Main, many years later was who gave me one of the first major breaks in understanding what the case was all about, primarily in that he was the first one who clearly and uncategorically stated to me that he had no doubt that the killers in the so-called Manson murders or Tate LaBianca murders knew the victims, and he basically stated that that was an open secret in Hollywood, and that almost everyone involved in the small circle of people who knew these individuals was aware of that. And that was a major break in my research into the case. So even all those years back, I think it's interesting that the first thing that even got me thinking about Polanski and Tate was this particular horror comedy called The Dance of the Vampires, which I saw in Paris. So I don't know why it captivated me, but it did. And it stuck with me for some reason. And in retrospect, I think it was some kind of premonition, because even though it's a very lighthearted film, something about it seemed uncanny or disturbing. And I believe it was a foreshadowing of what would later be my involvement in this case. In 1970, I wasn't really aware, I don't recall being aware of any knowledge of the murders themselves when they occurred, because I was in Europe when that happened, and it didn't get covered to the same extent there. So I don't really remember that. But in 1970, when the Manson and his 3 co-defendants were on trial, that was all over U.S. television and the news constantly. And in the summer of 1970, I was in New England and became captivated with the way that the media was covering it, particularly because at that time in New England, I was looking very much into witchcraft trials and the Salem witch trial and the Salem witch hunt, which is sort of the epitome of American moral hysteria and mass panic. And even as a young child, I saw parallels between the Salem witch trial and the way that the media was treating the Charles Manson and co-defendants trial, in that they were the sensational tales of occultism and Satanism and the almost religious level of scapegoating of these people, even as a child, seemed to me to be a parallel to the Salem witch trials. So I didn't study it in any great detail, but I was captivated by it, and particularly from the beginning, I noticed, Charles Manson is being presented as a delusional madman, but the very few things that ever seeped out at that time, which wasn't much, seemed to me to make sense. And I should also point out, at that time in Boston, where I was when that was happening, in New England, the hippie community there, this has been forgotten, pretty much considered that Manson had been framed to tar or to destroy the reputation of the counterculture and of the peace movement. So that was a very common idea, and I encountered in head shops in Boston posters